Good afternoon, class. My name is Timothy Robine, and for my ethical case study, I will be discussing the Facebook Cambridge Analytica data scandal. Now, for a little background, the Facebook Cambridge Analytica data scandal emerged in 2018 and involved the unauthorized access and misuse of personal data from millions of Facebook users. Cambridge Analytica, a political consulting firm, obtained user data through a third-party app on Facebook, which collected information not only from users who had consented, but also from their friends without explicit permission. Now, this data was then used to create targeted political advertising during various elections, raising concerns about privacy, consent, and the responsible use of business intelligence. Now, there's a myriad of ethical considerations, but some of the ones that I'm going to talk about today are going to be privacy violations. One of the primary concerns was the unauthorized access and use of personal data from millions of Facebook users. Cambridge Analytica harvested this data through a third-party app without the user's explicit consent, which raised serious privacy issues. The manipulation of democracy. The scandal highlighted the potential for the manipulation of the democratic process through targeted political advertising and misinformation campaigns. In the crafting of the digital video content for ads, according to a whistleblower, the bulk of the money was spent on a specific group of individuals referred to as the persuadables. Now, while these persuadables are everywhere throughout the country, but the persuadables that mattered were the ones that were in swing states. This was then broken down by precincts of the state. To target the persuadables in those precincts, if you can change enough of those persuadables in enough precincts, then those states would switch from red to blue. Now, by utilizing these psychographic profiling techniques, Cambridge Analytica allegedly aimed to influence voter behavior, which raised questions about the integrity of the democratic elections. Informed consent. This incident shed light on the importance of informed consent regarding data collection and usage. An analyst who worked for Cambridge Analytica stated that they were offered apps on Facebook that were given special permission to harvest not just from the person who used and joined the app, but it would then go on into the entire friend network and pull out all of the friends' data as well. And in some cases, they even took private messages. Many users were unaware of how their data was being collected, processed, and used for targeted advertising and political messaging, emphasizing the need for greater transparency and control over personal data. The firm obtained the information without users' consent from a researcher who had been allowed by Facebook to deploy an app on the platform, which then harvested the data from millions of its users. The responsibility of the tech companies. The scandal prompted discussions about the responsibility of tech companies like Facebook in safeguarding user data and preventing its misuse by third parties. Critics have argued that Facebook should have implemented stricter data protection measures and oversight mechanisms to prevent such breaches from occurring. Regulatory oversight. The Cambridge Analytica scandal underscored the need for stronger regulatory oversight of data privacy and protection. It prompted calls for governments to enact stricter regulations to prevent similar incidents in the future and holding these companies accountable for data misuse. Ethical use of data. The scandal raised broader questions about the ethical use of data in the digital age. It highlighted the ethical implications for leveraging personal data for targeted advertising, political campaigns, and other purposes without the user's informed consent. They targeted these individuals with specifically crafted ads based on their profile until they saw the world the way they wanted them to. Like a boomerang, your data goes out, it gets analyzed, and it comes back at you as targeted messaging. Now, there are two ethical dilemma questions I would like to highlight. One, how should businesses balance the need for data-driven insights with ethical responsibility to protect user privacy and ensure informed consent? And two, to what extent should governments regulate and enforce ethical standards for the responsible use of business intelligence to safeguard user privacy? Now, for the resolution, I chose the Act Utilitarian Ethical Procedure. So if we consider the Act Utilitarian Ethical Procedure, first we have to identify the action. The action in question is the unauthorized collection and use of personal data from millions of Facebook users by Cambridge Analytica, a political consulting firm. We next must consider all affected parties. Act Utilitarianism also considers the impact of an action on all the parties involved. In this scandal, the affected parties include Facebook users whose data was harvested without consent, Facebook as a company facing reputational damage and loss of user trust, Cambridge Analytica, which sought to manipulate user data for political gain, political entities and their opponents who may have benefited or suffered from the data manipulation, regulatory bodies and lawmakers responsible for protecting user privacy and maintaining a fair electoral process. We then have to evaluate the consequences. Utilitarianism is centered around an action being morally right if it produces more pleasure or happiness than pain or unhappiness for those affected, and vice versa for the morally wrong. In the case of the Cambridge Analytica scandal, we can see the positive consequences where Cambridge Analytica potentially gained a strategic advantage in political campaigns by targeting voters with tailored messages. Additionally, the political clients of Cambridge Analytica might have perceived these services as beneficial for their campaigns. However, once we analyze the negative outcomes, we see a much larger impact. Some of the negative consequences were the massive breach of privacy for millions of Facebook users, leading to the erosion of trust in social media platforms, the manipulation of the democratic process, undermining the integrity of elections by influencing voters through deceptive means, legal and regulatory backlash at both Facebook and Cambridge Analytica, resulting in fines, lawsuits, and additional regulatory scrutiny, damage to the reputation of the entire digital marketing and data analytics industry, fostering distrust among consumers. Now, after an analysis of the consequences, we have to calculate net utility. Act utilitarianism calculates net utility by subtracting the negative consequences from the positive ones. In the case of the Cambridge Analytica, the negative consequences significantly outweigh the positive ones. The breach of privacy and manipulation of the democratic process caused widespread harm and undermined societal trust in the digital platforms and democratic institutions. Any benefits accrued by Cambridge Analytica and its clients are overshadowed by the immense harm inflicted on millions of individuals and the democratic process itself. Finally, we have to determine ethicality. Act utilitarianism judges the action as ethical if it produces the greatest overall utility. In the case of Cambridge Analytica, the unethical collection and use of personal data for political manipulation resulted in significant harm to individuals, the democratic process, and societal trust. Therefore, act utilitarianism would likely deem the actions of Cambridge Analytica as extremely unethical due to the negative consequences outweighing any potential benefits. Now, there were multiple consequences to this scandal that I'll go through right now. The regulatory action. In response to the scandal, governments around the world initiated investigations into Facebook and Cambridge Analytica's practices. In the United States, the Federal Trade Commission, FTC, launched its own investigation, and in its written opinion, the Commission found that the Cambridge Analytica violated the FTC Act through deceptive conduct alleged in the complaint. The final order prohibits Cambridge Analytica from making misrepresentations about the extent to which it protects the privacy and confidentiality of personal information, as well as its participation in the EU, United States Privacy Shield framework, and other similar regulatory or standard-setting organizations. Additionally, Facebook will pay a record-breaking $5 billion penalty and submit to new restrictions, a modified corporate structure that will hold the company accountable for its decisions it makes about users' privacy and to settle the Federal Trade Commission charges. Policy changes. Facebook implemented various policy changes and updates to enhance user privacy and data protection. Since the release of the documentary known as The Great Hack, consumer data protection has improved. The United States, with 5 states enacting comprehensive privacy laws. For example, the platform restricted developers' access to user data and introduced new measures to improve the transparency and accountability. Since the Cambridge Analytica scandal, Facebook has been scrambling to limit the data that app developers have access to. The company previously announced that they were dedicating many APIs to limit the transfer of data outside of Facebook. Now, although some critics have argued that these changes were reactive and insufficient to address the underlying issues of data misuse and data manipulation. Public awareness and industry scrutiny. The Cambridge Analytica scandal highlighted and heightened the public awareness about the importance of data privacy rights and digital ethics. It prompted individuals to become more cautious about online activities and the sharing of personal information on social media platforms. The scandal promoted increased scrutiny of the tech industry practices regarding data collection, targeting, and advertising. It has also led to calls for greater transparency, accountability, and ethical oversight in the use of personal data for commercial and political purposes. However, achieving a consensus on what this framework looks like and how these industry standards will move forward is proven pretty challenging. Now, as for the critique, I think that the U.S. government's handling of the Cambridge Analytica scandal was mediocre at best. I think that while there were changes to regulatory oversight and the legal framework in which these companies operate, changes to transparency, accountability, and additional policy changes, I think that the changes came too late. One of my biggest gripes is that the response time. One critique could be perceived that the delay in the government's response to the scandal. Now, why the scandal emerged in early 2018, it wasn't until later in the year that the significant actions were taken, such as the FTC investigation and the subsequent settlements. Now, there continue to be ongoing challenges associated with data rights of individuals and corporations and how they house it. Was the ethical dilemma resolved in the best manner possible? Why or why not? I would say that while the Cambridge Analytica scandal prompted some regulatory and policy responses, the ethical dilemma it has exposed has still not fully been resolved. Achieving meaningful progress requires ongoing efforts to strengthen data privacy laws, to enhance corporate accountability, and foster a culture of ethical behavior in the tech industry. Would I adopt the same approach to resolve a similar ethical issue? I would have adopted the same approach for a similar issue, yes. While I believe the investigation took too long and that the fines were also too low, I believe the approach was appropriate. Although I do think that some of the individuals involved should have faced harsher punishment, I do believe that Facebook and the Cambridge Analytica did do irreparable harm to the democratic system, and they demolished the level of trust many individuals have had in that system and their platforms. I'm just coming up on the time limit, but that's all I have for the case study, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.